Could Ireland and Dublin make the same mistakes that other cities and countries have made in the past, and is it avoidable? This is not something I really wanted to talk about on this channel. I know not everyone will share my point of view. I hesitated even making this video. So show your support if you can, and let me know if you do have a different point of view. I understand that this topic is divisive, but be respectful in the comments when you do share a different point of view. I want to focus this channel on property, and I will try to link back property as much as I can within this video, but housing and immigration are now being pitted against each other, and housing and immigration are now being used as another way to separate people and spread hate. Divide and conquer is in full swing. First it was REITs, then it was the investment funds, then landlords. They even went after our parents, trying to suggest that their generation had it easier. And now the new villain that's getting all the airtime on social media and media is immigration and refugees, another way to distract us from the real issues that are causing our housing crisis. I haven't listened to David McWilliams in a while, but I was suggested to listen to one of his recent podcasts titled, "Is Immigration a Class Issue?" A lot of good points were raised within this podcast, and it is worth a listen. David did mention the benefits of globalization, and one of the results of globalization is immigration. Perhaps immigration happened well before that, but he does raise it as one of the consequences as to globalization. I would also kind of add that one of the kind of main benefits we've got out of globalization that is more evident over the last year or two is that it kept inflation at bay for many decades. And when countries closed up their borders or trade routes due to COVID, this really kick-started inflation, and that snowballed ever since. And it is kind of shown that our central banks have limited powers in terms of controlling inflation because of globalization. David explains that there is winners and losers of globalization, but generally speaking, globalization has been a benefit to us. Also that there's winners and losers to immigration, but mainly in the whole that immigration is a positive. But David does explain or give an example of Detroit being a loser due to globalization. And then also some small sectors of society lose out due to immigration as well. And it got me thinking that this is far too simple of a way to explain what happened to Detroit and why Detroit fell from grace, and what Dublin could possibly learn from Detroit and make sure that we don't follow in the same fate. Detroit was one of the wealthiest cities in the world in the 1940s. Their car manufacturers were the best paid employees in the world at the time, comparable to, let's say tech developers in San Francisco at the moment. Many of those best paid workers started to move away in 1950s, and then by the 1960s, most of the wealth had moved away from Detroit, and a lot of jobs had also disappeared. Like many cities in the late 60s and 70s, Detroit was a no-go area. Similar to New York, where millions left the city, New York was the murder capital of the world. The car and suburbia had taken hold, and cities were dangerous areas. Detroit's downfall due to immigration or globalization is not the full story, not even half of it. The city failed because it didn't innovate and didn't change with the times. They got stuck in their ways. They had a mindset that they were building the best cars and couldn't learn anything from their Japanese rivals that they had just beaten in a war a few years earlier. So they refused to innovate, and they were left behind. Think about it, the car industry was booming at the time. Detroit was at the heart of the US war machine, building engines that won World War II. Detroit was in a prime place to benefit from that boom. But in less than 2 decades, Detroit's car manufacturers were passed out by car companies in countries that the US beat in World War II, including Germany and Japan. Cheap labor was an element, but innovation was key to the car manufacturers in Germany and Japan. Cities must change and innovate if they want to be successful. David McWilliams even mentions this in a few podcasts, that businesses must change and innovate if they want to be successful. Dublin as a city is no different. Dublin must not get stuck in the past or go backwards. 100 years ago, the main industries in Dublin were Guinness, whiskey, biscuits and textile mills. Now Dublin's main industries are tech and finance. Some might say they'd prefer to go back to the Guinness days, but no one can argue that Dublin has come a very long way. Boston was a shipping port, but their wealthy residents saw that change was in the wind, and they started to invest massively in education. Now Boston's main industry is third level education. New York started out processing sugar and cotton, but became one of the world's leading clothing manufacturers. But that industry, like the Detroit car industry, lost out to other locations. New York went through some very hard times, but with good policy, innovation, and the capital to invest, it became the financial capital of the world. And now New York is full of innovation. But why did Detroit not change, innovate, bounce back like New York and many other cities? A lot had to do with access to capital and skilled labour, and very little had to do with immigration and globalisation. David McWilliams kind of skips over this in the podcast and starts talking about M&M, but access to capital and skilled labour plays a major role in the ability to change and innovate and to be successful. Riots in Detroit caused chaos between April 4th and April 5th in 1969. Fueled by unemployment, police brutality, racism and racial segregation, many public and private businesses were destroyed and burnt down. The riots and the destruction were so bad that many business owners, landlords and investors just walked away. They got whatever insurance money they could get their hands on. They left the city completely and invested elsewhere. Capital was chased away and it never returned, and there's still signs of the damage that was caused more than 50 years ago still in the city. Detroit's failures are not a warning of immigration or globalization. The lesson is that cities need to change, they need to innovate, and they need to move with the times. The evidence suggests that cities that welcome immigration fare better. Look at New York, the city of immigrants, has done extremely well over the decades. Also, it's important not to chase capital away, which Dublin is a little bit in danger of doing. Cities and countries that close themselves off to immigration tend to suffer, living standards are reduced. We only need to look at Brexit for a recent example of this. Less people are moving to London, less companies are investing in London, capital is being chased away, and living standards are dropping. Irish media and social media have pitted home buyers against REITs, landlords, their parents, and now migrants. It is evident over the last few years that government have reacted to populism, making it harder for investors to buy, adding taxes, restricting landlords' rights, adding to CPO powers, watering down property rights in general, resulting in an even deeper rental crisis. If some buyers are restricted in what they can buy, it's not just their rights that are being impacted. The sellers' rights are also being impacted as well, because they no longer can sell to who they wish. If restrictions are placed on capital in Ireland, we run the risk of scaring off that capital, as investors can invest anywhere in the world if they want. And capital will be important for innovation and change within Ireland. If we scare off people moving to Ireland, we risk scaring off talent, people perhaps coming to set up businesses and create more jobs. We also have a scarcity of construction workers to build all the homes we need. And that labour has multiple choices of where they can work anywhere in the world. If Ireland is seen to be unwelcoming, we will not be able to attract the labour that we need. Protests will scare off labour and capital because international markets and labour markets see how quickly our government has reacted to changing policy because of some of the populist bullshit. To bring this back to housing for a minute, we need a number of things to solve the supply issue. We need more zoned land, more certainty around planning, access to materials from a global market, access to a global labour market, and access to a global capital market as well. And it's important not to scare them away. I think it's important to ask, whatever happened to the land of 1,000 welcomes? Was it ever really a thing? As someone that is married to a US citizen, she's a migrant in Ireland, and I'm a migrant when I'm in the US. I have a green card, but I'm still a migrant when I'm there. And getting that green card wasn't easy. There was lots of checks and balances. I'm not saying that it should be a free-for-all in Ireland whatsoever. There should be checks and balances, and they should be required. And a strong policy is needed. But a human touch is also needed as well. As Ireland is a nation of migrants, the Irish have left Ireland for many reasons, and generally we haven't been welcomed in other countries, no matter how much we want to think we were now. Just think of all those signs in the past. But in the next few weeks, Irish government ministers will be meeting the heads of states all around the world with unrivaled access to those heads of states on the 17th of March. Other countries will celebrate Irishness, lighting up buildings and statues around the world in green, dyeing rivers green. I can't think of any other nation or country in the world that gets or enjoys such a privilege. If you can think of one, let me know. I believe we Irish enjoy this privilege that no other country does, is because we are an island of immigrants and we have spread all over the world. I hope Ireland will still enjoy this privilege in 10 or 20 years' time, but if we're not going to be welcoming ourselves in Ireland and telling people that Ireland is full, I can't imagine that that privilege around the world will last much longer. The world is a big place. Ireland is a small island. I do think everyone should try live somewhere else for a few years just to experience new things. Cultural diversity is very common in major cities all around the world, and Ireland and Dublin perhaps has been very sheltered of this over the last few years, and I do think Dublin is due for a rude awakening in terms of diversity in the coming years, which I do hope is going to be a good thing for Ireland and the city. The world is changing out there. I hope for the better. I would think that closing borders would be a step backwards and a step in the wrong direction. As always, I just want to say thanks for watching. Show your support by liking the video, subscribe to the channel. It will be more property related videos in the future, I promise. And even if you want, share this video if you feel comfortable doing so.